The Subcommittee on Europe of the House Foreign Affairs Committee will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to examine U.S. policy towards Georgia and Moldova in advance of their upcoming elections later this year. I'd also like to welcome the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, who is joining us today. He will participate following all other members in today's hearing. I ask unanimous consent that the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Ross, be allowed to sit on the dais and participate following all other members in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. On Christmas Day, nearly 33 years ago, the Soviet Union ceased to exist as a sovereign state. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and with it, millions of people were freed from Soviet oppression. Within a span of 2 years, the 15 republics of the Soviet Union were independent, free to decide their own fate. Old adversaries became new partners, responding to the hand of friendship offered by the United States and by our allies. Today, we examine two of these former Soviet states, Georgia and the Republic of Moldova. Both are proceeding down very different paths. Moldova is on track to be a post-Soviet success story. With the help from the United States and the European Union, Moldova has made significant progress rooting out corruption and malign Russian influence. It has worked to reform its system of justice, demonopolize its energy sector, and curtail the influence of the oligarchs who held back Moldova's progress and prosperity for far too long. With the EU accession talks commencing last month and the World Bank projecting Moldova's GDP to increase by 2.2% this year, Moldova's future is bright. Moldova holds its next presidential election in October, alongside a referendum on its integration with the European Union. This is an important moment for Moldova. Will it continue down its pro-Western path, or will it revert back to the Kremlin's sphere of influence? In the past, Moscow has not shied away from using covert and overt methods to try to coerce its former subjects to bend to its will again. Congress will be watching this election in Moldova closely, and we're eager to hear from the administration what it is doing to prepare Moldova for the potential Russian interference. Across the Black Sea, Georgia has sadly followed a very different path than Moldova in recent years. Since Georgia gained its independence from the Soviet Union, the Georgian people have shown a fierce determination to root out corruption, to throw off the country's Soviet past, and to pursue a closer relationship with the United States and Europe. Georgians have fought and spilled blood, not just to defend their own country against Russia's war of aggression in 2008, but also alongside U.S. service members. Georgia was one of the first of the largest non-NATO troop contributors to the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. That is why the recent actions of the current Georgian government, led by Georgian Dream Party, are so disappointing. Over the past several years, Georgian Dream has allowed itself to be infiltrated by malign elements, openly attacking its Western partners, and pursued a closer relationship with Russia and with China. In May, the Georgian government passed the so-called Foreign Agents Law, despite multiple warnings from Georgia's Western partners, including a letter led by Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Meeks, which I and many of my colleagues here signed. Make no mistake, Georgia's Foreign Agents Law has ruptured Georgia's relationship with the West. These actions threaten to reverse Georgia's decades-long, hard-fought progress and spit in the face of the Georgian people, an overwhelming majority of which support joining the European Union. Many Georgian citizens bravely and peacefully took to the streets in opposition to the malign actions of their government. Sadly, they were met with violent repression and arrests. In the midst of the debate over the Foreign Agent Bill, Georgian Dream's leader threatened fierce vengeance against his political opponents in a speech that would be well suited to a tin pot dictator, not a close partner of the United States. I'm eager to see how the people of Georgia respond to these actions by their government during the critical parliamentary elections in October. In closing, I will note that there is both room for hope in Georgia and Moldova this October. I believe that the vast majorities of citizens in both countries are eager for a closer partnership with the United States and do not want to see their countries, once again, subjugated to the Kremlin's will. I'm eager to hear from our witnesses today in their assessment of the political situation in both countries and what we can do to protect and promote American interests in both. I now recognize the ranking member, gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, for any statement that he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses and actually thank the Moldovan ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Urso, who's joined us in the back of the room here today, too, as well. Thank you, Chairman Keane, for holding this hearing. The Black Sea is a region of critical importance to the United States foreign policy, and I'm glad that today we're taking an in-depth look at Georgia and Moldova ahead of the upcoming elections in both countries that will occur this fall. With both the Georgian and Moldovan people making their Europe-Atlantic intentions clear for decades, I have confidence that they'll continue to make their voices heard at the ballot box later this year. Unfortunately, and despite public support and constitutional obligations to pursue EU and NATO membership, the ruling Georgian Dream Party has strayed from the country's Euro-Atlantic path. Just last month, Georgian Dream pushed through a Kremlin-inspired foreign agent bill to crack down on civil society and freedom of expression in the country. Today, I have two messages for the Georgian government and the Georgian people. First, to the Georgian government, your actions have not and will not go unanswered. In May, the State Department implemented an initial tranche of visa restrictions on officials and, importantly, family members. So long as the Georgian government continues to trample on democracy and the rule of law, I have no doubt that this administration will continue to impose visa restrictions as well as financial sanctions as necessary. Furthermore, while the Georgian Dream touts a trade deal and visa liberalization regime with China, it's important to remember that Beijing is actively supporting Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, even as the Kremlin continues to occupy 20% of Georgia's territory in this illegal war. Put simply, the Georgian Dream government is making deals with those supporting Georgia's occupier. There are fewer examples than that in the ruling party's betrayal of the Georgian people. People still haunted by the memories of their own war with Russia not too long ago. Second, to the Georgian people, your ambitions for a future in the EU and NATO are well known, and this Congress and administration will continue, as we have for the last 3 decades, to support you in these efforts. The Georgian People's Act, which I introduced last month, and the Mogabari Act with my friend Representative Joe Wilson, exemplify our determination to support your democratic future, even as your government breaks its constitutionally obligated promises to pave the way for EU and NATO ascension. While Georgian Dream's actions run counter to the will of the Georgian people, President Sandu of Moldova has fortified Moldova's Euro-Atlantic future with impressive reform efforts despite the numerous challenges thrown her way. She's traversed a pandemic, the outbreak of a Russian war on her border, Ukraine and gas crisis, as well as strengthening Moldova's relationship with the United States and the European Union. This includes beginning accession negotiations with the EU in late June. I congratulate Moldova on this important step forward for EU integration and look forward to the day they formally join the alliance. At the same time, Russia has a long sought-after effort to undermine Moldovan politics and democratic reform. In late 2022, I wrote a letter to Secretaries Yellen and Blinken to call attention to Ilan Shor, a pro-Russian Moldovan businessman's responsibility for stealing more than $1 billion from Moldovan banks. I'm glad to see that the administration has sanctioned Shor and his cronies who have worked against the interests of the Moldovan people. It's also reassuring that the sanctions on Shor and his cronies were not a one-off and have been followed up with additional sanctions as appropriate. As we look to the future, the U.S.-Moldova strategic dialogue has greatly strengthened our bilateral relationship. The most recent dialogue in April of this year reaffirmed our joint commitment to advance defense and security cooperation, Moldova's EU integration, and important justice and anti-corruption reforms. Furthermore, U.S. financial support has been critical to serving Moldova from complete dependence on Russian gas, as Moldova now meets 100% of its gas needs with non-Russian supplies. An amazing achievement in such a short period of time. Georgia and Moldova comprise a fraction of the Black Sea countries, but are demonstrative of how U.S. engagement can positively reinforce the security, economic prosperity, and democratic resilience in the entire Black Sea region. As we address the existing and future challenges in the Black Sea, it's critical that we're prepared, critical we address existing and future challenges there. I worked with Chairman Mike Turner and Senator Shaheen on a Black Sea Security Act to draft an interagency strategy towards the Black Sea region. I look forward to receiving this report from the National Security Council as soon as it's completed, and I hope it will further U.S. leadership and influence in the region for the years to come. I again want to thank Chairman Kane for holding this hearing and for our witnesses being here, and I yield back.
Thank you. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a panel of distinguished witnesses before us today on this important topic. From the Department of State, Mr. Joshua Huck and Mr. Christopher Smith are Deputy Assistant Secretaries in the Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. And from the U.S. Agency for International Development, Dr. Alexander Sokolowski is a Deputy Assistant Administrator in the Bureau for Europe and Eurasia. Thank you for being here today. Your full statement will be made part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your verbal remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. I now recognize Mr. Huck for his opening statement. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon. Chairman Kane, Ranking Member Keating, distinguished members of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Europe. Thank you for your invitation to speak today about the U.S.-Georgia bilateral relationship in advance of parliamentary elections this October. I want to thank the members of this committee for their continued support of strong U.S.-Georgia relations. That support has never been more critical than it is today. This hearing comes at an extremely important time in both our bilateral relationship and for the future democracy in Georgia. The Georgian government has been deviating sharply from the country's past democratic trajectory, putting its Euro-Atlantic aspirations and its relationship with the United States at risk. It has passed undemocratic legislation, demonized civil society, and issued disinformation and rhetorical attacks against the United States and European partners who've supported Georgia for decades. The foreign influence law passed by the ruling Georgia Dream Party on May 28th symbolizes this anti-democratic shift. This law, which mirrors a law put into force in Russia, is designed to silence critical voices, smear independent NGO activists and journalists, and cow Georgia's vibrant civil society. The Georgian Dream government passed this law despite mass protests by its citizens, U.S. objections, and a clear finding from the Council of Europe's Venice Commission that the law was not compatible with European norms. Over the past many months, the State Department has engaged at all levels to make clear to the Georgian people that we continue to support their democratic Euro-Atlantic aspirations, while at the same time making clear to the Georgian government that it's headed in the wrong direction. During a visit to Tbilisi in May, Assistant Secretary Jim O'Brien and I underscored U.S. objections to the Georgian government's undemocratic actions, warning of consequences if the ruling party did not change course. Similarly, Undersecretary of State Uzra Zeya and Undersecretary John Bass recently reiterated to Georgian officials that the government's actions are incompatible with the democratic values that underpin membership in the EU and NATO. As a result of Georgia's ruling party's decisions, on May 23rd, Secretary Blinken announced a new visa restriction policy to promote accountability for those undermining democracy in Georgia. He also announced a comprehensive review of our bilateral relationship, including our assistance to Georgia. On June 6th, we took steps to impose visa restrictions on Georgian ruling party officials, parliamentarians, and law enforcement personnel responsible for or complicit in undermining democracy in Georgia. These steps built on our previous actions, such as visa restrictions on corrupt judges and financial sanctions on FSB-linked Georgian-Russian oligarch Otar Partskaladze. We are also working closely with interagency colleagues on additional steps, including potential redirection or suspension of assistance programs and the cancellation of policy engagements. DoD recently announced the indefinite postponement of a military exercise in Georgia. It remains our hope that Georgian leaders will reconsider their actions and return to Georgia's long-stated Euro-Atlantic aspirations. We have made clear to the government of Georgia that the best way to do this is to repeal the foreign influence law, cease spreading disinformation about the United States, stop progress of other undemocratic legislation, and ensure the pre-election period and the October parliamentary elections are conducted freely and fairly. 2024 is a crucial year for Georgia's future and its democratic progress. We have underscored to the government the importance of ensuring free and fair elections and noted that we are watching the conduct of electoral processes very closely. We've supported Georgia's request for an election observation mission from the OSCE, and we've called on the government to ensure unimpeded access for international and domestic election observers. We remain steadfast in our support to Georgian civil society in the face of pressure from the government and even harassment and physical attacks. We engage with civil society representatives regularly and are actively supporting their efforts to ensure the October elections are free and fair. The Georgian people must decide the future of Georgia, so we must remain mindful of the threats to Georgia from Russia, which still occupies 20% of Georgian territory. In closing, I want to reaffirm that, despite these difficult times, the United States' commitment to the Georgian people remains steadfast and unchanged. Americans and Georgians share a special friendship, grounded in our shared values of the love of liberty and independence. We will continue to support the further development of a vibrant, secure, and democratic Georgia. Thank you for allowing me to speak here with you today, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huck. I now recognize Mr. Smith for his opening statement.
Chairman Kane, Ranking Member Keating, and distinguished members of the committee, it is an honor to speak with you today about our policy on the Republic of Moldova. Under the constant threat of Russian aggression, interference, and disinformation, and with the prospect of EU membership hanging in the balance, there is much at stake for our partners in Moldova and for the United States in a region that is critical to our national interests. I'm happy to report that thanks to our close cooperation to help Moldova meet this moment of opportunity and challenge, our bilateral ties with Moldova have never been stronger than they are today. As we have implemented our strategy for Moldova, Congress has been a powerful partner every step of the way. From the funding appropriated for critical assistance to the high-level engagement and policy advocacy from members, including members of this subcommittee, to advance our common objective for a Moldova that is free, whole, democratic, and secure. Moldova's October 20th presidential election and simultaneous national referendum on EU accession represent a historic opportunity for the people of Moldova. Amidst the devastating impact of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, President Sandu's government and the Moldovan people have taken bold steps to build a more democratic, secure, prosperous future firmly anchored in the West. A core objective of our strategy is to ensure that Moldova's course towards EU integration is irreversible. It won't be easy to reach this goal, but with continued strong support from the United States and our European partners and allies, we are confident Moldova can succeed. Our strategy rests on three main lines of effort: high-level engagement with the Moldova's leaders and its people to signal our strong political support, assistance to help Moldova bolster its security and territorial integrity, achieve energy independence, and integrate its economy with the West, and finally, sanctions and other measures to meet and help Moldova meet and master the challenge of Russian malign influence designed to knock the country off its rightful European course. When President Sandu was elected in December 2020, she ran on a bold vision of fighting corruption and bringing her country closer to Europe. During the past 4 years, Moldova has made remarkable progress towards the European Union. It's opened formal accession talks just last month. U.S. assistance, including approximately $824 million committed since February 2022, has played a significant role in advancing Moldova's rule of law, anti-corruption, energy, and economic progress that helped unlock this historic achievement. There is still work to be done to advance Moldova's integration with Europe, and we must continue to support these reform efforts. Fortunately, we are not acting alone. European and G7 partners have also provided billions of dollars to support Moldova and help them accomplish these goals. For example, since 2021, the European Union has given approximately 2.4 billion euros to support socioeconomic development, security assistance, and reforms in Moldova. The Moldovan people have made a courageous choice to seek integration with Europe, particularly in the face of the Kremlin's intensified hybrid threats and ongoing efforts to keep Moldova in its purported sphere of influence. The Russian government has invested significant time, energy, and money to thwart Moldovans' sovereign choice to build closer ties with the West. They have done this using a variety of tactics, including disinformation campaigns, malicious cyber activities, and efforts to funnel illicit funds into the country in an attempt to undermine democratic processes, especially elections. We have taken and will continue to take concrete measures to help Moldova resist this Russian malign influence. Just this year, we sanctioned Marina Tauber and Yevgeny Gutul, who engaged in blatant interference activities in recent elections in Moldova at the direct behest of Moscow. These sanctions send a strong signal that the United States will not tolerate threats to free and fair elections in Moldova. We recently cooperated with the governments of Canada, the United Kingdom, to release downgraded information that showed Russia's current plans to illicitly sway the upcoming presidential elections and foment unrest if a pro-Kremlin candidate is not elected. And we're working to strengthen Moldova's security in all spheres, from elections to border protection, to energy to cyber. Finally, the unresolved status of the Transnistria remains a challenge. We support a results-oriented OSCE process to resolve the conflict and uphold Moldova's territorial integrity and its sovereignty. We thank all of you on this committee for your strong backing of Moldova during this critical period. The people of Moldova have shown remarkable resilience in the face of unrelenting Russian pressure. They now face a critical decision on EU integration that will determine their future as a sovereign, independent country. Together with our European partners, we will continue to provide the engagement and support Moldova needs to achieve our strategic interest in a Europe free, whole, and at peace. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith, and I recognize Dr. Sokolowski for his opening statement. Thank you for joining us.
Chairman Kane, Ranking Member Keating, distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Europe, thank you for your invitation to speak today about USAID's efforts to support democratic development in Georgia and Moldova. I welcome the opportunity to share the agency's work to strengthen the foundations of freedom in the region. Georgia and Moldova have been important U.S. partners seeking closer ties with the West for decades. Since independence, and despite being in an increasingly threatened and turbulent neighborhood, they have made remarkable progress and enacted major reforms. As a result of these efforts, in partnership with the United States, last December we saw the opening of European Union accession talks with Moldova and achievement of EU candidate status for Georgia. Yet, in Georgia, we are now facing a moment of profound concern for the country's future. Tens of thousands of patriotic Georgians have spoken out on repeated occasions and protested the foreign influence law in order to protect and defend Georgia's democracy and its hopes for European integration. The recent passage of the foreign influence law is an unnecessary step in the wrong direction, which is threatening civil society and polarizing Georgia. The action has frozen progress towards and could derail Georgia's hopes for EU membership, and is causing grave concerns about the trajectory of Georgia's democracy. The law causes alarm among so many, not just because it was based on a Russian law, but because the model of governance that it represents, one of increasing stigmatization and distrust towards civil society and restriction of its activities. U.S. support for Georgian democracy and Georgia's impressive past accomplishments on this road were built on shared values of individual and societal freedoms, human rights, and a common vision of democratic governance, embracing a strong, active, and vibrant society in dialogue with government. Now, as an aside, I've been saying I've been traveling to Georgia for 2 decades, and this is the Georgia that we had known until recently. We want to see Georgia adhere to these values and realize this vision. Given the gravity of the current situation, we are conducting a comprehensive review of bilateral cooperation between the United States and Georgia and we at USAID are working closely with our State Department colleagues on this effort. Since 1992, USAID has provided approximately $1.9 billion in assistance to Georgia to strengthen democratic institutions, improve health and education, and promote broad-based economic development. Today, U.S. assistance to those institutions and organizations that are working towards a democratic Georgia and a Euro-Atlantic path has become all the more important. Georgians will head to the polls in October to determine their country's future and the course of their democracy. USAID is supporting a robust, multifaceted set of programs to foster free and fair elections. This includes pre-election assessment missions, long-term and short-term international domestic observation, support for transparent, accountable election administration, and independent media's coverage of the elections. More than ever, we believe that comprehensive oversight from multiple sources will be crucial for ensuring the integrity of the electoral process and instilling public trust. Turning to Moldova, that country has suffered greatly as a result of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine starting in 2022. And despite this, I recall witnessing the great generosity and hospitality of the people and the government of Moldova as they welcomed Ukrainian refugees when I traveled to the border with USAID's administrator in April of that year. USAID has stepped up and pivoted programming in the aftermath of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine to help address the resulting challenges in Moldova. USAID is supporting diversification of Moldova's energy sources that have enabled Moldova to break away from its 30-year dependence on Russian supply. We also continue to foster increased trade with the European market. Moldova has also been a focus of USAID's Democracy Delivers initiative, which works to surge support and resources to democratic countries to help them take advantage of windows of opportunity to implement reforms for their citizens. As part of this, we've increased our efforts to combat corruption by enhancing the capacity of the National Anti-Corruption Center and the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, while also supporting civil society, transparency, and accountability initiatives. Moldovans have made their intentions clear in seeking greater integration with Europe. This year's presidential election and vote for a referendum on EU accession in Moldova will be critical tests of those intentions and for the country's democracy and sovereignty. USAID assistance has improved access to voting for all Moldovans and continues to strengthen transparency in the electoral process. USAID supports civil society to increase awareness about election processes, to monitor elections, to inform judges on electoral legislation, and to advocate for improved electoral code. We've helped modernize the Central Election Commission's information technology system and strengthened oversight of political financing and promoted electoral education and aligned electoral legislation with international standards.
Thank you, Dr. Sokolowski. I appreciate your opening statement. And I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. In May, the Georgian government, led by the Georgian Dream political party, passed a so-called foreign agents law. Georgian Dream claims that this law is harmless and is similar to the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, here in the United States. Mr. Huck, what is your response to this? How are the Jordan Foreign Agents Law and FARA different?
Thank you very much for the question. And I appreciate it because we've heard this allegation or this statement from Georgia Dream in the past, and it is patently not true. The two laws are very different, and I can lay out a few specifics. But in addition, for a full rundown on this, I would direct you to the Venice Commission has written a detailed report analyzing this. I'd be happy to share as well. But in a nutshell, four quick items. First, FARA legislation does not differentiate between a profit entity or a not-for-profit entity. It's all treated the same. The Georgian law targets only civil society and media organizations. That's a first problem. Second, the U.S. FARA law exempts media organizations so long as 80% or more of the ownership is U.S., right? It's American. In Georgia, they don't make that distinction. In fact, media is specifically targeted, which has a serious impact on independent media there. In addition, the FARA law is based on your actions. Are you, in fact, acting at the direct control of a foreign entity? The Georgian law does not make that distinction. Again, it only looks at where your foreign funding comes from. So if you're an NGO working on early childhood education or something of that nature, and you receive a grant from Finland or pick any other country, you are irrefutably, irrebuttably labeled an agent of foreign influence of Finland, regardless of what the actions of your given civil society organization is. None of this stands to reason. It's for all of this is why both we and our European partners have analyzed the bill closely and assessed it does not align with transatlantic norms. Thank you.
So you're basically saying, and you agree, that their law is very similar to the Russia law and would actually much closer to what President Putin is pushing within Russia and in his allies, states.
I would agree with it as a Russian-inspired law, we often say, and it is quite worrisome that while Georgia's longtime partners and allies, like the United States and Europe, have warned and urged Georgia not to move forward with this legislation, Russia, the country that occupies 20% of Georgia, has praised the law. And we've made the case to the Georgian Dream and to the people of Georgia that when your friends are urging you to not do it and your occupier is urging you to do it, it really ought to make you think.
Thank you, Mr. Huck. Mr. Sokolowski, the clear pretext of Georgia's foreign agents law is to impose control over the organizations that have worked for years to bring Georgia closer to the Euro-Atlantic community. Many of these organizations are implementing partners of the State Department and USAID. Once the foreign agents law comes into effect in September, what impacts will it have on state and USAID's implementing partners in Georgia, and what guidance are you providing to them about this new operating environment? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Chairman Kane. On one level, we are facing a situation that has some degree of uncertainty. We are waiting for implementing guidelines to come out with regard to the legislation, and we anticipate those coming out in August. At the same time, we are not sitting and waiting. Our mission in Tbilisi has been working with our partners on what we're calling a lean-in strategy with civil society as we help them to weather this transition in the environment and to offer them sets of services that to this point, they have not needed. And these are the kind of services that they may need in a more challenging and less conducive environment for their work. And in there, we're talking about legal assistance, assistance to help them understand how they can comply with the law, security for their staff, and so forth. So there's a number of different things that we're working on. We've set a goal to make sure that we are focusing and orienting our assistance to help NGOs as they enter this difficult period.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, Moldova has been slipping out of Russia's orbit for several years, and based on consistent public polling, seems like will continue to do so. Is the State Department concerned about more overt and direct Russian interference and intervention in Moldova as we get closer to the October presidential election and EU referendum?
We see very clear, first of all, thank you so much for the question, Mr. Chairman. We see very clear action by the Russians to undermine this upcoming election and the referendum. They are engaging networks of interference financed by the Russian state and also by oligarchs and criminal organizations designed to deprive the Moldovan people of their right to choose, their right to make a decision about their country's future. And we are working through sanctions to target those organizations and disrupt their operations, but also to support reforms necessary to ensure this election is protected from that type of influence.
Thank you, Mrs. Smith. And now recognize Ranking Member Keating for any questions that he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up with Mr. Smith because I see great benefit, even to the U.S., in understanding the disinformation tactics employed by Russia in Moldova. We've seen their actions in France recently. We've seen their actions in Slovakia, in fact, and in the Baltic countries for years. But it's becoming more and more pronounced. And in Moldova, you indicated both how illicit funds are getting into the country for this. If you could give us some more detail on that. And plus you mentioned that the U.S. and Canada have seen a plan, actually a detailed plan of what they're doing. Could you give us more details, if that's possible, in an unsecure setting, about what they're doing? It's really important for Moldova that they're able to combat this, and they've done a great job, I think, to the extent they can. But this is something that will affect, with our own elections coming here, Russian disinformation tactics. So the more we can learn about what's going on in the rest of the world, the better it is all the way around. So if you could, take a few minutes. And
Thank you, Ranking Member. I would describe the Russian campaign in Moldova as consisting of three critical elements. One is that they use illicit funding in order to try to get people to come out and protest.
now,
based on-
where did the funds emanate from?
The funds emanate from Russian-backed oligarchs, including Mr. Shore, who you mentioned in your opening statement, somebody that the United States has designated.
There's a person that stole $1 billion from
Exactly,
the
sir.
Moldovan
And
government.
somebody who is operating a network of influence and using his financial connections to try to push illicit money into the country. Additionally, he is promoting false narratives about the outcome of the referendum. For example, promoting the idea that if Moldovans were to support a referendum on EU integration, that would result in Russia suddenly attacking the country, and that would bring Moldova closer to.
How is this information being transmitted?
They
What
use
media
social
source?
media, and they also use programming on Russian-controlled television and Russian-controlled media that's broadcast from Russia.
That is
into
true,
Moldova.
because when I was there not too long ago, I learned that in Moldova, because of it's one of the poorer countries in Europe and some of the production, that the television that they, including children's television, family television, all television, is Russian originated. And within that, they have great influence. So go ahead.
That's correct, sir. And then the third method that they use is backing particular candidates. And they have backed particular candidates who are running in this election. They have ties to those candidates. They are encouraging them, and they are trying to drive a consensus among certain candidates to support a pro-Kremlin position that is counter to the will of the Moldovan
And they're trying to
people.
just really inhibit turnout and voting as well. you
They're
said.
trying to undermine turnout by, again, spreading false information that somehow Moldova will be dragged into the war in Ukraine if Moldovans were to support the EU referendum. And they're also trying to drive an agenda that undermines the accomplishments of President Sandu and meeting the aspirations of the Moldovan people to fight corruption, to strengthen their democratic and economic institutions.
And there are, when I was there too, and if you could tell me if this is still in play or if it's even expanded, they were using domestic issues. They don't come out with pro-Russian statements. They come out with disinformation regarding, for instance, the economic conditions in the country and other. Can you give us some examples
Yeah,
of that?
one of the narratives that they try to foster is that Moldova's turning away from a reliance on energy emanating from Russia, gas resources, for example, has caused a raise in prices for Moldovans. It's actually quite the opposite. In most cases, now that Moldova is buying gas on the open market according to EU norms and rules, most of the prices are cheaper than what Gazprom was offering them earlier.
So they're able to use that influence even to distort the truth to their
That's correct,
advantage.
sir.
And they're using these domestic issues because the group behind it, the ultimate goal is to create a government that's pro-Russian, so that they're not using propaganda as we might remember from the Cold War. They're much more sophisticated in attacking domestic issues, trying to make the government look weaker, even when those are lies.
The goals that we have seen them articulate and that we shared in the declassified information that we announced publicly together with the governments of Canada and the UK make clear that they are doing this in order to get a pro-Kremlin candidate in office.
Yeah, my concerns about Georgia that I addressed in my opening statement are extremely important, but I wanted to drill down as we have on this. We don't have the opportunity because this is important in Moldova. It's important with all the elections in Europe, but it's also important here in the United States because we'll see these same tactics here. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. I now recognize Mr. Wilson for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank Chairman Tom Keating and also Ranking Member Bill Keating. In this regard, you can see bipartisan appreciation and support of the people of Georgia and Moldova. We want the best for both of the countries. And with that in mind, I've had wonderful visits to Tbilisi, to the nation of Georgia. What a beautiful city, Tbilisi. It's just amazing. And then I had the opportunity to go to a joint parachute jump that was really interesting. It was troops from the nation of Georgia with the troops from the state of Georgia. and there's a state partnership program, and the professionalism of the Georgian military. Two of my sons served in Iraq and also Afghanistan with Georgians, and they knew if Georgians were there, they were safe. And so we want to build on that relationship. And I've also seen the negative. I've been to Gori, incredibly the birthplace of Joseph Stalin, but I've been there to see the fence where the encroachment, the occupation of South Ossetia, Abkhazia have taken place, and the violation of territorial integrity of the people of Georgia. So sadly, Putin is just trying to recreate the Soviet Union. Georgia and Moldova, sadly, have remained in the war criminal Putin's territorial line of fire since declaring their independence from the failed Soviet empire. It's really become clear, sadly, that war criminal Putin is trying to recreate the failed Soviet Union empire to benefit the oligarchs. And he's first oppressing the people of Russia. Then he now is threatening every former Soviet republic at risk as he seeks to provide for the recreation of the failed empire. The brave and courageous people of Georgia and Moldova have inspired the world in pursuit of freedom and democracy. That's why I was grateful to introduce the bipartisan Megabori Act to hold the pro-Russian Georgian Dream Party accountable for its assault on the will of the Georgian people, while also offering a path to restore Georgia's Euro-Atlantic trajectory. As we proceed, I want to thank all the witnesses, and I have seen firsthand Mr. Smith and his service overseas, and how fortunate we are to have State Department personnel do so well. Mr. Huck and Dr. Sokolowski, Secretary Blinken has stated that a review of all assistance to the Georgian government is on the table following the decision to proceed with the foreign agents law. And I appreciate the visa sanctions that have been applied, at least responsible for those who came up with the law. And people need to know foreign agents law means that the ability of a government to arrest people for disagreement. In 2010, that was the law initiated by the Duma to stamp out all opposition in the Russian Federation, a country that should be a great country. It's not. And also, they followed through in Venezuela with a foreign agents law. And so dictators see this as a way to expand. With this question that I have, given that more than a month has passed and the foreign agents law will come into force in September, can you outline what the administration plans to take substantive action in response? What action or actions being considered, and then what's being done to help the people of the nation of Georgia have free and fair elections?
Thank you very much for the question. I'll give a few comments and then turn to Dr. Sokolowski for some additional. First, I'd like to outline U.S. Actions across 4 lines of effort. First, clear, high-level, direct messaging to the government of Georgia. They are headed in the wrong direction. To make clear what they need to do to return to the path of Euro-Atlantic, a Euro-Atlantic trajectory and greater Euro-Atlantic integration, which is what the people of Georgia have so clearly said for so long that they want. But in addition to clear messaging and discussions with the Georgian government, we've taken actions as well. On May 23rd, Secretary Blinken announced this full review of all of our bilateral relationship, including assistance. The assistance review is ongoing as well. We've taken steps to issue visa restrictions on dozens of Georgian ruling party officials, parliamentarians, law enforcement, and family members. We are continuing to look at all the tools available to us for additional steps. I'm not able to preview today what exactly those are because we don't preview sanctions or punitive actions, but we are reviewing the full set of tools at our disposal, whether that's for violations of human rights, corruption, or undermining democracy. Everything is on the table and being reviewed. In addition, we are continuing to message loud and clear to civil society, to the Georgian people, that any actions that we take are targeted and deliberate and focused on the Georgian Dream ruling party or the individuals responsible, and not to the people of Georgia. The United States for decades has been the clearest, loudest advocate for Georgia's territorial independence, their sovereignty, and their democracy, and will continue to do that. I'd like to pass to my colleague for a couple additional thoughts on civil society.
Sure. Thank you very much, Josh, and thank you very much for the question. We agree that this is a critical moment for Georgia, and we need to really focus on this electoral process to help Georgia move in the right direction. There are a number of components to what we are trying to do there. There are some that are already in place. So there has been a pre-election assessment mission by NDI that was out in February. It was actually right after I was just there. And then they're going to do another one this summer. I talked about observation of multiple organizations already in my statement, but overall there are going to be about 100 long-term observers and about 2,100 short-term observers. Finally, two quick things. Get out the vote efforts. We're going to try to make sure that a lot of people get out and vote and take advantage of their democratic rights, and then also support of the Central Election Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Chair now recognize Madeline Dean from Pennsylvania. 5 minutes of questioning.
I thank you, Chairman Kane and Ranking Member Keating, for having this hearing. I thank you for your testimony, all of you, and more importantly, for your work with the State Department, with USAID. It's an extraordinarily important work that you are doing in a part of the world that is extraordinarily important. I wanted to focus on what we talked about with the foreign agent law. As we've heard from you, our witnesses, the recently passed foreign influence law, foreign agent law in Georgia has raised significant concerns, and with good reason. The law, which was previously withdrawn from consideration in large part due to significant public outcry, as you detailed, is reported to mirror the Russian law that has been used in practice to stifle dissent. In response to the enactment of this law, it's been swift, including the EU halting Georgia's accession and freezing 30 million euros in financial support. Mr. Huck, thank you for your testimony. How does the foreign influence law compare to the equivalent legislation in Russia? We talked about what does it look like in comparison to American law. What does it look like as compared with a Russian law?
Thank you very much for the question. Unfortunately, we do see strong similarities to the Russian law, both in the nature of the law, but also on the intent. What is so worrisome about this law is not just the actual the terms of it that we discussed earlier, but it's the intent. It's the fact that the Georgian Dream government has publicly and specifically said it's targeting civil society and independent media with this law, and that it intends to use it to punish critics or those that it sees as threatening its rule. It said that publicly, which is quite concerning. So this is also how we've seen that law be used in Russia, and we've seen, of course, with devastating impact, the way that Moscow has wielded these kinds of tools. So these are all the reasons that we are particularly concerned about this, especially given this moment as we head into the election. It's precisely at this moment where Georgia needs a powerful, empowered civil society to perform functions like election observation or policing and oversight of government institutions to ensure that they're meeting the needs of the Georgian people.
What's that punishment look like? How are they going to use the law, and how will they punish folks?
Yes. So as Dr. Sokolowski mentioned, in August, the implementing regulations will come out. So when that comes out, we'll have a little more information about the nitty-gritty details of what the registration requirements are and how it will be carried out. But we already know that the government is threatening steep penalties for non-compliance. And we also know that under the terms of the law, individual members of that organization, not just the ownership, but the members of any given organization could be held responsible and could also face fines, penalties, or even additional repercussions.
And connected to that, Dr. Sokolowski, you stated in your testimony that USAID is supporting a robust, multifaceted set of programs to try to foster free and fair election. This includes pre-election assessment missions, long-term and short-term international and domestic observation, support for transparent, accountable elections administration, independent media coverage of elections and efforts, end quote. Again, the implementation of this law, how will the foreign agent law impact what USAID, what you will be able to accomplish in protecting free and fair elections?
Thank you for the question. I will just echo what we've said before. This is a moment of great uncertainty because we don't exactly know the implementing regulations and what they will look like. So there is great concern about how this will affect the elections themselves, because also the timeline for implementation of the law is running up right before the elections themselves. However, I can say that there is one bit of possibly encouraging news, which is that the International Republican Institute, who we support, has recently met with the Prime Minister, who at least gave lip service and said that he was interested in seeing free and fair elections. Our partners are planning to work to provide this oversight. However, I don't want to say that with certainty we know that they will be able to operate in the run-up to the elections. That's the plan, and we're going to do everything we can at USAID to work flexibly to help them to do that.
Terrific, and thank you. I see my time is expiring, but Mr. Smith, thank you also for your extraordinary work, too. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Ms. Wagner from Missouri for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman for organizing this very important and timely hearing, and I want to thank our witnesses for their time and service. I, too, want to focus on Georgia today, which is obviously heading into, we've alluded to and discussed here, consequential elections in October. I am gravely concerned that Russian influence over Georgia's government is growing by leaps and bounds. In a country, by the way, where nearly 80% of the population supports NATO and EU membership. It's pretty astounding. The West must not leave the Georgian people to the mercy of a corrupt pro-Putin elites. And it would be extremely short-sighted to allow Putin even greater latitude to sow chaos and violence in Europe amid, we've all seen it, mass protests attended by literally hundreds of thousands of Georgians. The Georgian government kind of rammed through its own version of Russian legislation that Putin has used to silence opposition groups and the media and attack organizations that with ties to the West. Assistant Secretary Huck, the State Department confirmed, and you've mentioned it here in the hearing, that travel bans have been issued for some Georgian officials for supporting the Russian law, so to speak, as frankly many Georgians are calling it that, and for violence against peaceful protesters. Will the State Department take additional action, including imposing potentially financial sanctions to hold these officials accountable, and if so, when?
Thank you very much for the question, and appreciate the concerns, which we definitely share. In terms of actions, I've detailed some of what we've done already, but I will say that we are actively, this is an active process to look at every tool that we have that we can make available to hold individuals accountable in Georgia for either corruption, violation of human rights, or undermining democracy. We are looking at all of those.
And what would some of those be, besides the travel bans? I'm looking at sanctions.
Sanctions, economic sanctions, which we have done in the past, including on Otar Partskaladze, a Georgian-Russian oligarch, and visa restrictions on judges as well. We're not afraid to use those. We're actively looking at those. I don't have something to preview for you today because we don't announce them in advance, but if I could say one other piece that I think is really important that we need to do right now, which is to recognize that the Georgia Dream government is trying to have it both ways. They want to criticize the United States, criticize European partners, and at the same time tell their own people that they're still on track for membership in the EU. It's unconscionable, and I think it's important for us and the international community to make clear to the Georgian voters, the Georgian people, that there is a clear choice. They have their own decision to make, but that the path that Georgia Dream is leading them on is not toward a transatlantic future that the Georgian people have said they want.
Let me switch tracks a bit. In May, the Georgian government announced that a Chinese consortium had won a bid for construction of the deep sea port in the city of Anaklia, I think it's called, on Georgia's Black Sea coast. Anaklia's strategic location makes this a crucial project for Xi Jinping. Assistant Secretary Huck, how concerned are you about this project? Because I am. And what are the ramifications for regional security if China were to gain control over this strategic port?
Thank you very much for the question, and completely share your concern. It is surprising to us that the Georgia Dream government has decided that China, the country that is bankrolling Russia's ongoing brutal invasion of Ukraine,
Correct.
the same country that occupies 20% of Georgian territory illegally in violation of international law at this very moment, is an appropriate strategic partner for Georgia. That is surprising to us. That is something that we have raised very clearly with the Georgian government. Something that not only is a strategic risk, but also as they look at any perceived economic benefits from partnering with China, they need to look at the costs of that as well, the risks of dependence on China, and thereby opening themselves up to economic coercion.
I think we have to urge our EU partners to also weigh on this, especially as they look to become members of the EU and NATO. Given China and Russia's no limits partnership, sir, does Chinese control of Anaklia's deep sea port also entrench Georgia further with Russia's sphere of influence?
Well, it certainly raises concerning questions. Now, Georgia does not have diplomatic relations with Russia. The Georgian public has spoken very clearly that they do not want Russian troops anywhere near the rest of Georgia. They already are they have bitter, deep, painful memories from the invasion in 2008. And so they're very clear. The Georgian people have spoken. So the question is, will the Georgian Dream government listen?
My time has expired. I appreciate the chair's indulgence, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Wagner. I now recognize Representative Titus from Nevada for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very interested in Georgia and Moldova because I'm the ranking member of the House Democracy Partnership, and both of those countries are partners in that arrangement. And so we are very active working with some of the NGOs trying to build up their legislatures in hopes that that's kind of the key to moving towards more democratic institutions specifically and governments generally. So I hate to see that it's moving in the wrong direction. The passage of that Foreign Agent Act just shows not only the political influence that Russia is having in Georgia, but you also see it in economic influence. You see imports increasing, exports increasing. You heard about the port. All of these things are happening at the same time, and it doesn't bode very well. There's some attempts that we have heard by some people about stopping their attempted accession into Western organizations. Several EU officials have called for that. I think you said, Mr. Huck, that the State Department supports freezing those accession talks. Would you give us a little more information about that? And if we were to do that, couldn't that have the opposite effect of what we want and push them more towards Russian influence?
Thank you very much for the question, and it's an important one. First, of course, we have to say, related to EU accession, this is ultimately a decision for the EU members. But what the EU Council has announced is a de facto freeze. The door is not closed. Georgia remains an EU candidate country, but the process is de facto frozen based on the actions and rhetoric of the Georgia Dream government. That is a decision that we certainly understand from the perspective of the EU because you, as I said earlier, can't have it both ways. You can't be taking these actions as Georgia Dream and making these kinds of really wild accusations, if you've listened to some of the speeches by Georgia Dream leadership, and then expect no repercussions, or even tell your people that everything is on track. But I think there has been some discussion of what if the EU would take additional steps. I don't want to speculate on hypotheticals, but I can certainly say that the steps that the EU has taken already should be enough of a wake-up call for Georgia Dream to see that they are not moving in the direction that their people have so clearly and so regularly said they want. Something like 80 to 90% of the Georgian people support EU membership. And clearly, the Georgia Dream government's not heading in that direction. So the Georgian people will have a real decision to make come October.
We've talked about the Foreign Agents Act or Foreign Influence Act. They've also passed some pretty repressive LGBT rights acts. Are those playing in the discussion very much?
Yes, so you're right. There are a number of different pieces of legislation that the Georgian Dream government have taken over the past few months that are concerning. The law you mentioned is not yet not yet into law, but they've introduced it, which is concerning, and both we and the European Union have looked at it. The Council of Europe's Venice Commission also did a full analysis of that law and raised very serious concerns that it would stigmatize one section of the population, that it could promote hate speech, that it would prevent equal protections under Georgian law for human rights of all Georgians. So for that reason, it's yet another step that the Georgian Dream is taking, where its partners and friends are saying, this does not align with the transatlantic trajectory that your people say you want, and so this is of a great concern to us. Again, that's not yet law, but we'll be continuing to track it and raise our concerns with the government.
Do you see things like that in Moldova?
I'm happy to report that actually in Moldova, the situation is going in the other direction. And that's largely due to the fact that they have done so well in implementing the reforms required for opening accession talks with the EU. Now, as they move forward beyond talks, they're going to be opening chapters and really integrating their system, not only with EU practices, principles, and norms, but functionally integrating it and addressing issues that apply to human rights, but also practical issues dealing with the economy. So we're quite encouraged by the progress that Moldova has made in this space, and we'll continue to align our engagement and assistance resources to encourage that progress further forward.
What we often hear when we talk to legislators there is how much they're doing to have an independent judiciary and to fight corruption, and that hopes that will propel them into these Western alliances. And then you go home and then it's not so much. But what do you see on that front?
We see tremendous progress when it comes to their commitment. And really, Maya Sandu, when she was elected president back in December 2020, she put judicial reform at the very front and center of her anti-corruption efforts. We've used our assistance and in partnership with the Europeans to help them put in place vetting processes to make sure that they're recruiting the right people into the judicial branch who are going to approach these types of questions in a free and fair manner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Titus. I now recognize Representative Lawler from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As one of the co-chairs of the Moldova caucus, along with Rep. Ross, it's truly been remarkable to see the Moldovan government's transformation from a pro-Russian kleptocratic regime to a pro-democracy, pro-Western government under President Sandu. And the work that has been done not only to reform the judiciary, but to prosecute and apply sanctions with the cooperation of the United States government on Russian oligarchs has been an important step forward. And currently Moldova is seeking EU membership, which I think is another important and positive step towards strengthening not only their democracy, but strengthening their economy moving forward. But it doesn't come without its own challenges. Mr. Smith or Mr. Huck, what is the U.S. doing to prioritize Moldova through programs such as IMET, FMF, and other accounts within the International Security Assistance Program at the State Department? And how much has Moldova received through these programs in recent years?
Thank you very much for the question, Representative Lawler. Since Russia's full-scale invasion, our FMF budget for Moldova has increased tenfold. We've used that funding not only to help them improve their combat capability as a military force, but also training and education has been a cornerstone of our assistance. We've focused not only on helping them develop their officer corps, but also the non-commissioned officer corps, which is so essential to a strong and resilient military. Our assistance has extended even beyond the military and, of course, focused on our close cooperation with the border guards to help strengthen their border as they face pressure emanating from the Russians. And also, we have worked closely with law enforcement in a deep partnership to help Moldova meet the challenge to their security emanating from what the Russians are trying to sponsor inside the country as well.
Putin and many within his government have made it clear that certainly if Ukraine were to fall, Moldova would be in their sights. How concerned is the administration about that?
As President Sandu has stated herself, the defenders of Ukraine are not just defending Ukraine. They're defending Moldova and they're defending Europe. We take very seriously the threats emanating from Russia, both in terms of its illegal invasion of Ukraine, but also the threats it poses for the wider region. And that's why we have aligned our assistance in support of Ukraine to ensure they prevail on the battlefield and can deter future Russian aggression.
And given that, has the administration directed any ERIP funding towards Moldova, and are you planning to in this upcoming fiscal year?
We have directed funding from the supplementals for Ukraine to Moldova. Some of that funding has delivered instrumental transformations in Moldova, one of which we talked about a little earlier, which is the energy transformation. Moldova went from being 100% reliant on Russian gas, for example, now to buying it on the open market according to EU norms and EU practices. Our assistance was essential in meeting that objective. And it's had positive results even at a practical level for the United States. Just last April, for the first time ever in history, Moldova bought LNG exported from the United States. These are the types of achievements we've been able to reach using those resources.
Given Moldova's plan and focus on EU ascension, do you see a future where Moldova applies for NATO membership, especially given their relationship with our NATO ally, Romania?
It's an interesting question, sir. Thank you. They are constitutionally, as you know, a neutral country, but they have been a member of the Partnership for Peace for 30 years. And they have actively participated in NATO training and in some peacekeeping operations as well, including contributing forces to the NATO peacekeeping operation in Kosovo. This will be a decision for the Moldovan people. But just as with EU accession, if the United States is partnering with Moldova, we will support them on their Euro-Atlantic path, should they choose that course. For now, we're focused on the EU.
The administration describes corruption in Moldova as endemic, but I don't think that's something that we should accept. Can you describe why the administration feels Moldova has endemic corruption, and what are we doing to help change this narrative?
We assess the situation in terms of corruption in Moldova has improved significantly since Maya Sandu came to office in 2020, but we still face legacy corruption that Russia uses to try to manipulate decision-making inside the Moldovan government and advance its narrative, particularly when it looks to target elections and the upcoming EU referendum. We see corruption that remains in the rule of law sector, in the judicial sector, and we're working closely to use our assistance and engagement to help the Moldovans tackle it.
Well, to that end, it would be critical to be engaged in election monitoring and ensure that the Russians do not interfere in Moldova's elections.
Fully concur,
Thank
sir.
Thank you, Mr. Lawler. Chair now recognizes Representative Costa from California for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman and members of the subcommittee here. This is, I think, an important topic as it looks as the Eastern Europe and the challenges we see not only in Ukraine, but the ripple effect that is taking place. I think the conversation, I'm told, this afternoon is reflected in part the backsliding that's taken place in Georgia, and how we can do our best to reverse this trend, but also the pattern of that backsliding affecting Moldova and Armenia. Armenia is a small country that has been impacted by the actions of Azerbaijan, and frankly, that trend with Russia in the lead, and I began referring to my colleagues and to my friends in Europe as Russia today being a syndicate masquerading as a country with a mob boss called Putin, because he's a war criminal. That's just the way I see it. How can we apply what we've learned in the case of the backsliding in Georgia to deal with democratic resilience in other efforts in the region that we're involved with? And I guess one of you are an expert in Georgia. Josh, is that you? And then
Yes,
Christopher, you're the Moldova guy?
that's it. Yes, thank you for the question, and happy to address it. Also, Dr. Sokolowski may have something to add from the civil society.
Quickly, because I have another question.
Okay, sure. So briefly, we remain very concerned about Russia's broader malign intentions to the whole South Caucasus region. Clearly, it sees this region as an area that it should have preeminence over, and it would like to see weak, divided, isolated countries on its border that it can take advantage of. And so for that reason...
And Russia's the original imperialistic country going back 400 years. I mean, I think Putin sees himself as a reincarnation of Peter the Great. I didn't think he was so great.
Yes, so what you mentioned Armenia. Two things that we are doing in the administration. First, strongly supporting through every way we can the achievement of a just and durable peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The Secretary Blinken just met with the foreign ministers of the two countries earlier this month. There's no single thing we could do to improve the lives of the people in the South Caucasus region more than achievement of a just and durable peace. So we are making that effort.
120,000 Armenians, part of Nagorno-Karabakh, now in Armenia. The USIA aid is helpful, but we need to do more.
Thank you. On the specifics for those who have fled, I think I can also turn to Dr. Sokolowski, who may have some more. I just wanted to stress the extensive efforts that the U.S. government is now taking on behalf of our support to increase Armenia's resilience writ large. We just had a strategic dialogue capstone event in which we announced that we are upgrading the relationship to a strategic partnership.
It's important.
And we're also increasing assistance levels. I'll turn to Dr. Sokolowski for perhaps a little bit more on that.
Quickly.
Yeah, sure. Just would note that our administrator, Samantha Power, was out in Armenia earlier this month with Assistant Administrator Aaron McKee. And then also over the last 3 years, we've effectively doubled our assistance for Armenia. So we definitely understand the importance and are working closely with our European colleagues to answer the call on Armenia's needs.
Christopher, you might comment with relationship to Moldova and Georgia. What are our partners doing, our allies, to help us support the effort with bolstering democracy and civil society, both in Georgia and Moldova and Eastern Europe? And I think Poland is an important leader in this effort, and Radek Sikorski is now the foreign minister, and he has a keen view on, frankly, what Poland's focus and response should be.
European allies and partners, thank you for the question, sir. European allies and partners have been absolutely essential into maintaining the progress that Moldova has made on its course towards the European Union and the strengthening of its democratic and economic institutions. Through the provision of assistance, through technical and advisory support, they have helped achieve reforms that have unlocked doors that were previously closed to Moldova on its European path. We're also working closely with them to sanction and take other measures to disrupt and dismantle the networks of corruption Russia backs to try to hold Moldova back and undermine its progress. Poland has been an absolutely essential partner in this space. I would also cite the UK, Canada, France, the European Union itself. Moldova has a lot of partners and friends, and they're stepping up to the plate to ensure this progress moves ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired, obviously, but I mean, Russia is the modern-day version of the Sopranos. And we just ought to be clear-eyed about that.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. I now recognize Mr. Heisinger for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and appreciate your time as well to our witnesses. To both Assistant Secretary Smith and Sokolowski, since the war in Ukraine began in February of 22, the U.S. has provided Moldova with $774 million in financial aid, with $300 million of that specifically for energy security. Can you speak to precisely what that $300 million has been used for and sort of the efficiency, effectiveness of what those goals and objectives are?
Thank you very much for the question, Representative Huizenga. I'll speak quickly to the policy implications and then turn it to Alex for the details on the assistance. Our goal with that assistance was to help Moldova break its decades-long dependence on Russia when it comes to the energy assistance. We achieved that and helped the Moldovans achieve that, and have now transitioned them from being totally reliant on Russian gas to buying gas on the open market, including from the United States. The first LNG shipment in history from the U.S. Was purchased by the Moldovans. It's also been important to ensure Moldova was able to meet the tremendous humanitarian impact from Russia's war on Ukraine. Small country of 2.5 million people, they welcomed 1 million refugees in the early months of the war from Ukraine, and our assistance was essential in helping them meet that
Okay,
challenge.
I appreciate that. Let's go back to the first part, though. Isn't Moldova currently relying on Russian-controlled and Russian-fueled plant in Transnistria?
The Transnistria region continues to rely on Russian gas that is basically coming through Ukraine from Gazprom. We have been working carefully and closely with both the government of President Sandu in Chisinau and also the authorities in Transnistria to look, as we approach the question of a broader political settlement, what will be the implications for energy resources.
How about Moldova gas?
Alex, I don't know if there's more you'd like to add on the
I mean,
specifics
because
of our assistance.
I'm assuming this is to try to unbundle and untangle the necessity of Russian energy, correct?
So, thank you for the question, Rep. Huizinga. With regard to gas supplies, as my colleague Chris had mentioned, there is major progress with regard to the supply not coming from Russia anymore. It is electricity, which continues to be the issue, and depending on the time of the year, that's between 70 and 90% of the needs for electricity are still coming from the MGRES plant that's in Transnistria. USAID is working to try to help Moldova diversify those sources, and it's funding a high-voltage electricity interconnection line with Romania that would allow Moldova to import electricity from European market and other markets.
Is this the nuclear electric?
I would have to get back to you and check on the specific sources of that, but I know that the key thing that we're looking for is that interconnection with Moldova.
Okay.
As opposed to getting the electricity from Transnistria.
Can either of you speak to the nuclear situation in the region? Nuclear energy specifically?
I would have to get back to you with regard to nuclear for Moldova. I know a bit more on what's happening in the Caucasus, but we can get back to you with details.
This is something I've asked in a number of hearings in different settings. Just what role does nuclear play in the pushing of that? So I appreciate that. If we could continue that conversation, I got about a minute left. Deputy Assistant Secretary Huck. I want to get back to one of the points that Ms. Wagner had touched on, I'm concerned about as well, and I'm afraid probably going to have to follow up in writing, but basically looking at China and their influence in that area. The Georgian government announced a Chinese consortium won the tender for the construction of a deep sea port in Anakalia, if I'm pronouncing that right, on Georgia's Black Sea coast, granting PRC a 49% share in the port. Strategic location of this port in the middle corridor, the trade route between China and Europe, make this a crucial project for Xi Jinping, I'm assuming. And obviously we all know that a good 20% of the territory of Georgia is controlled by the Russians. So talk to me a little bit about that interplay.
Yes, thank you for the question. And we share your concern, and this is something we've messaged clearly to the Georgian government, that it seems like a questionable decision to be engaging China as an economic partner when they are bankrolling Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as well as the occupation of 20% of Georgia. Specifically to the port, we also have concerns about some companies involved in that consortium. One of the companies involved has been designated by the United States for ties to China's basically military-industrial complex, as well as another of the companies has past concerns with corruption and fraud in previous projects.
I know my time has expired, but I'm follow up beyond this. I'm curious if Georgia feels like it has to choose between the devil they know, the devil they don't. I mean, they're 20% of their population or 20% of their land mass is held by Russia. They don't like that clearly, but what's their other option? And I would contend, Mr. Chairman, that the U.S. hasn't been doing enough to support that and push on that. And do they feel like they now have no other place to go but into the open arms of China? So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back, but I'd like to continue that conversation offline.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Huizinga. I now recognize Representative Ross from North Carolina. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member. I'm the co-chair of the Moldova caucus with Representative Lawler, and as some of you may know, North Carolina has a decades-long relationship with Moldova. Our National Guard has been working with the Moldovans, doing trainings for more than 25 years. And then we, of course, are part of the state partnership program for medical issues, education issues. I think every time I go back to my district, there's another Moldovan delegation that comes to visit, which I think is wonderful. And our Secretary of State just received the highest civilian honor in Moldova. I think that we've touched on a lot of the energy issues, and I'm thrilled that Moldova is making this transition. I think it's important to highlight that Moldova is not alone. I mean, Germany is making these transitions too, and Germany has so many fewer resources to call on while they're, so many more resources to call on than the Moldovans, and the Moldovans have been mighty in what they've done. I'd like to talk a little bit about additional assistance to Moldova in two areas. One, Moldova has absorbed more Ukrainian refugees than pretty much anybody else. And we hear in Europe, I just got back from Germany in a delegation about, all these refugees, Germany. Well, I love Germany, but Germany's very big and has a fair amount of money. Moldova is absorbing these refugees that, they barely can take care of some of their own financial issues. So I'd like to know about plans for further support for Moldova as they are mightily support Ukraine in this area. And then the second is, and I'm sorry that Congressman Lawler isn't here, but we have worked on some legislation together to help Moldova transition its military equipment away from Russian and even Soviet equipment, because that's really what they had, and it may be that they're in a situation where they need to be ready to go. And so I'd like to talk, I know we only have a couple minutes, but any additional assistance in both of those areas.
Thank you very much for the question, Representative Ross, and thank you so much for the support the state of North Carolina has provided to Moldova. It is known in the State Department as one of the premier state partnerships, and so I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight that, including the role of the National Guard. We're prioritizing both of the areas that you highlighted. As you said, it was a heroic effort on behalf of the Moldovan people to take in 1 million Ukrainian refugees in a country that is only 2.5 million in its entire population. About 100,000 of those refugees remain, and the Moldovans have done a great job with assistance from the United States and the European Union in helping to provide a basic security and assurances for those people who are dealing with the tragic outcomes of Putin's invasion. On the security assistance side, we are focusing together in partnership with Moldova on helping them develop the key capabilities they need to meet the security environment in which they are operating. And it is a very challenging environment indeed. And part of our effort is to not only focus on training and tactics that are Western model, but also focus on key weapon systems and equipment. And it'll continue to be a priority as we move forward with the Moldovans. Maybe, Alex, you'd like to offer additional points on refugees.
Sure. Thank you very much for that, Chris. As I said in my statement, I saw firsthand the generosity of the Moldovan people as they welcomed in so many people. I was at the Palanca border crossing. The one additional point that I wanted to make is that USAID has been helping the government of Moldova track and understand the needs of these 100,000 refugees who remain in Moldova. 95% of them are women and children. There are a lot of questions that they need, but we've been helping them to understand. There's a program called Data for Impact that helps the government of Moldova, understand what those needs are. So I just was going to mention that. Thank you.
And with the 33 seconds I have left, we have talked about the great job that Moldova has done meeting the requirements for joining the EU. Just very briefly, how important is it for Moldova to be part of the EU for its future democracy and its security?
It is the absolute critical node on their path to sovereignty, security, and sustained democracy. The accession process with the EU not only charts a course of reforms and changes that they need to make to strengthen their democracy and their economy, it provides a rightful place for Moldova in the European family of nations. That's why we are aligning our assistance and our engagement to support it, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. With no further questions from the members, I want to thank our witnesses for their valuable testimony, as well as the members for their questions. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional written questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these promptly and in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to length limitations. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Pretty successful. Oh, you're good. Yeah, we could do it.
What you got?
Did good, sir.
What was that? Reading. Right in front of me. Almost in the back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, good to see you. No, thank you.
You know, it might be on the banking.
Thank you for being so direct.
Some of the CRS stuff is going on. Maybe some of the banking and monetary things that were going on, because we didn't touch, so you might want to follow up. Thank you, good job. I know you, besides, sometimes it's only to one issue. Yeah.
There's the classified smart. He might be a little bit late if he's able to make it.
I'm just trying to go deeply once in a while. It's instructive for